Everybody, welcome back. This will be the last chapter in the Strike Force 1 saga. Strike Force 1 was the game that I chose to start with on my attempt to learn to play board war games after many years of collecting them. And I'm not going to make this intro too long because I've already kind of talked about the expansion kit in previous videos, but just to quickly summarize what we're going to add to the basic game will be random events, and random events, at least in the basic scenario, control reinforcements. There's going to be some different unit types with different combat and defense strengths, and then we will have, since one of those unit types is armor, we're going to have some special rules that have to do with armor and how armor is used in combat and its effects on retreating in zones of control. And with that, let's go ahead and look at what we get in the envelope. And by the way, this was released by Victory Point Games in 2008. It's designed by Alan Emmerich, and you can get more detailed information on the Victory Point Games website. Okay, Strike Force 1 expansion kit comes with, comes in an envelope, not a bag. Not sure why they do that, but that's pretty consistent with Victory Point Games' expansion kits, as they all come in these manila envelopes. I prefer the bags, but they probably have their reasons for doing this, where they don't have to print up a kit panel or something like that. So anyway, we'll open up the envelope, and what you get with the expansion kit is a set of rules. So you get the colored rule book. These are, unlike the basic game, these are 8 by 8.5 by 11 format. Again, full color, and helps if you have it turned right. Anyway, they're full color. The rules actually are only the first page and the second page, and then we start with the sample playthrough. So that's basically it for the additional rules for this. Is 2 pages, so it's not too bad. Full color, lots of diagrams. Looks pretty good. Next up, we have the counters that come with this game. I'll see if I can get those so you can see them. We have an additional Soviet infantry unit, 2 armor units, and an off-board support marker. Then we have this little guy. He's a engineer unit for the West Germans, and then we have an American armor counter. Again, like the previous game, same thick, kind of half shiny counters, identical to the basic game. I think they're pretty good counters. They're 3/4 inch, also like the basic game. And what more can you say about counters? Okay, so then we have our map, and this is probably the bulk of what you're paying for with the kit. And this is going to have a map which is the map itself is identical to the basic game map, with the exception of these outlined hexes are the objective hexes in the different scenarios. You still have the town hexes, which are the objective hexes in the basic scenario, and then these 3 other outlined hexes are going to be objective hexes in the additional scenarios in the back of the rules. So those are the change. Oh, and also you have the borders of the reinforcement entry X's are outlined in kind of that brown color and the green color for the American side. Now over here is the random events table, and you're going to roll, both the Soviet and the US player have different random events tables. And as you can see here, you're going to roll a die twice for your random event. You're going to roll once for the column, once for the row. So you'll roll, like say you roll a 2 on your first roll, that'll be your column, and then you roll a 3, then you'll be on row 3, so you would use this random event, and it works the same for the American player. If you look at the turn track, instead of being 4 game turns long, it's 6. So we have game turn 4 now is a night game turn, and the rule on the night game turn is going to be basically similar with other night game turns in basic war games. It's going to be a move or combat rule, but not both. And then we have the sequence of play again right here, and that basically rounds out your map. So that's basically what you get in the kit. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at the rules. And like I said, there's not too many additional rules to go over, so we'll just quickly cover those and then we'll get on with a sample playthrough. Okay, so here we have the sequence of play that's printed on the expansion kit map. And if you'll notice, it looks very much like the sequence of play for the basic game, and that would be correct. I think this was an oversight when they printed the map, because the very first step should be the rolling for random events. And so right before step 1 for the Soviet player, or the first player I guess, because in some scenarios it may be the US player. So kind of a step 0 there, if you were to look at the numbers, would be roll for random events, and step 2.5 would be the other roll for random events for the second player. So a little bit of an oversight, not a big deal. I guess I'll throw up a graphic here that would show the correct sequence of play, just real briefly. So there'll be 3 steps per player phase. So not a big change, but significant. So the next thing we'll look at will be the random events tables themselves. Okay, so here we're looking at the Soviet random events table. The 2 random events tables will work the same way in terms of the mechanic for choosing the random event. As you can see and probably deduce from the illustration here, you're going to roll 1 dice 2 times, and if the first roll is a 1, 2, or 3, you're going to choose your random event from this column. 4, 5, or 6, it'll come from this column. And which one you choose will depend on the second die roll, which will tell you the row to reference for your random event. So with that said, let's just go ahead and go through each of the random events so you can get an idea of what they are. The first one on the list here is tank reinforcement. That's going to introduce a new type of counter to the game for Soviet armor. The main difference with the armor units is that they will have an attack strength of 2, which you can see from the arrow there with a 2 in it. When they're defending, they have a defense strength of 1, just like the standard infantry units. And they will have some special capabilities that we're going to talk about in a minute, having to do with zones of control and infiltration, exploitation, and stuff like that. So we'll get to that in a minute. Next we have this infantry reinforcement. This is a new counter for this game, the unit G. It's a reinforcement kind of similar to the US reinforcement in the advanced game. It's a standard infantry unit, works just like the others, and does not have to come from units that have been eliminated in combat. Second echelon, however, is pooled from units that have been eliminated in combat. These are reinforcements that are brought back on the board. If a Soviet player has lost a unit in combat, he can bring them back on the board with this second echelon event. Next we have air support. Air support is going to use the offboard support marker, which looks like this. And you will take that when you're, say you rolled air support, you'll take this marker and you will place it over the area on the map that the attack that you're going to, the hex that you're attacking that you want to use the support for. and then when you roll, you'll get a +2 added to your combat differential. So that's the way the air support works. That's the way all these support will work. The G there actually is actually a misprint. I talked to Alan Emmerich about the G, and there's an exclamation point over on the US one that you'll see in a minute. And he told me that that was a font error when they printed the map, so the G doesn't have any significance. It should actually be a little silhouette of a fighter jet, but no. Next we have artillery support. Artillery support is just like air support, except you will only add +1 instead of +2. Next we have enemy snafu. Enemy snafu is basically where you get to simulate problems with your opponent's command and control, and you can take one of his units and flip it upside down so that it can either move or fight during its next game turn. Spetsnaz support. This is something that is kind of unique to the Soviet random events table, and basically its effect is going to be, it's not going to add any points to your combat differential, but it is going to allow the Soviet player to roll. When he's rolling for that combat resolution, he gets to roll the die twice, and he will use the lower of the two dice rolls, which is usually the more advantageous to his purposes. And then at the very end there we've got what they call according to plan, which is basically no effect. So it's like there is no random event for that turn. So that's the Soviet table. Let's go ahead and flip it around and we'll look at the American US player random events. Here's the US player's random event table. The mechanic works the same way as the Soviet table. The first one is an armor unit, and whereas the Soviet player had 2 armored units that he can choose from, he has up to two armor counters that he can bring onto the board. The US player only has 1. And it only has 1 event on the random event table, whereas the Soviet player had 2 armor random events. Over here we have a German reinforcement, and these are the West German Pioneer Company units. This is another new unit to this expansion kit, and kind of like the armor unit has a added combat strength of 2, the Pioneer units represent combat engineers, and I guess their ability to build fortifications and such give them a defense strength of 2, but when it comes to attack strength they have the same as the standard infantry units, which is 1. Next we have the German reinforcement unit. It's the same. There's only 1 unit, but there's 2 chances to roll for that random event, and that's the same counter that we used in the advanced game. The next event is Rally a Broken Unit. That's very similar to the second echelon on the Soviet table, where we can bring back a unit that was eliminated in combat. Next we have Air Support. Same as the Soviet air support, it adds +2 to your attack, and you would use again the off-board support marker for that, as well as the artillery. Oh, let's go to command problems next. Command problems are the same as enemy snafu. They allow the US player to flip over a Soviet unit of his choice, and that unit would not get to participate in movement or attacks in the next game turn. Artillery support, again, just like air support, only it's +1 instead of +2. And then rounding out the random events table for the US player, just like the Soviet player, according to plan, which is basically no effect. So that will do it for the random events. Next thing we'll take a look at are some rules specific to the armor units and zones of control when it comes to attacking and their ability to infiltrate zones of control and exploit, and we'll go over that next. Infiltration is the concept of armor being able to traverse from one Zoc hex directly to another Zoc hex. So with this setup, you have the Soviet armor unit here, and using the infiltration optional rule, he would be able to move directly from this Zoc hex to this Zoc hex, or from this Zoc hex to this one, or to this one. Only one Zoc hex can be traversed. So if you're inside a Zoc and you're going to another Zoc hex, your movement allowance is basically 1. The only other limitation with the infiltration rule is you can only go to open terrain hexes. So for instance, the armor unit would not be able to traverse into that Zoc hex because it's not an open hex. From a strategy standpoint, this would become important. Like for instance, in this situation, if you were the Soviet player, you could position your armor unit now from this Zoc hex to this Zoc hex and bring in your unit G here, and now you would have unit Z surrounded. Whereas if you were working with 2 infantry units, that would not be possible. So, and then again, of course, with units surrounded, the advantage to that is any retreat, defender retreat combat result is basically a defender eliminated. So those are the infiltration rules, and now we will go on to the breakthrough rules. The breakthrough rule, simply stated, is that when an armor unit is involved in an attack on an open hex and the unit is retreated, it retreats 2 hexes instead of 1 hex. So for instance, if we had armor unit I and infantry unit D attacking Z, and there was a defender retreat result from that attack, the unit Z would retreat 1 hex for normally, and then the second hex for the breakthrough. And that's pretty much it for the breakthrough rule. The only exception being it does have to be an attack on an open hex. So if we were attacking unit X with I and G, and he received a defender retreat result, because it's in a woods hex, the breakthrough rule would not apply, and the retreat would just be your standard 1 hex retreat. So now, with the breakthrough rules done, we will go to exploitation. One thing I didn't mention before was, if you have this situation here where you have a unit Y that's adjacent to a retreating unit X, and the armor unit causes a breakthrough, which means X has to retreat 2 hexes. If it retreats to stack with Y, at that point both units will retreat together for the second hex. Now, I don't believe there is a restriction that they have to retreat to the same hex at that point, but both units have to retreat. So like if this were the situation, you know, X and Y could either retreat this way, or X could go here, Y could go here. But once X stacks with Y, then both units are going to be required to retreat that second breakthrough hex. So now, again, if X had chosen to retreat this way, it is not stacking with Y. So now Y is under no obligation to retreat. So X would have to retreat the second hex, and Y could remain where it was. So just wanted to explain that real quick. So now we will go on to exploitation. Okay, the exploitation rules are, they're not too complicated, but they probably are the most complex rule in the Strike Force 1 family of games and and rules and options. Exploitation is basically going to allow some changes to the advance after combat rules when armor is involved in the initial combat. So if we have this battle here with G and I attacking X, and X receives the defender retreat, and as we just talked about, the breakthrough that would occur because of the armor being involved would require X to retreat 2 hexes instead of 1 hex. The exploitation rule states that the armor unit can advance into the vacated hex that X vacated for the retreat, and then it can move an additional hex, and it doesn't have to be necessarily along the path that X followed. It can go any it can make any legal hex move from there, 1 hex move. So if it had moved into this hex originally, after its initial advance after combat, now it can move here, here. I suppose it could even go down and stack with G, or here. So there is no, it can't move into a hex occupied by enemy unit, obviously, but it can move into zones of control hexes. So there are no zones of control limitations on exploitation movement. So let's just, for our example here, say that the armor unit is going to move along a straight path there and chase unit X for its exploitation. Now, the second part of exploitation says that another eligible unit that was participating in the attack, in this case unit G, would be that unit, and this can be an infantry unit or a second armor unit. By the way, only 1 armor unit is, if there was 2 armor units in the attack, only 1 is eligible for the 2 hex movement. But the second unit, whether it's infantry, armor, or well, that's the only 2 types, but it can now move into the original vacated hex, and that would complete your exploitation movement. So that's the basic case. Let's quickly take a look at another case where there might be some limitations. Okay, so here's a potential situation where the exploitation movement would be limited. Let's say we had these 5 units attacking unit X. One of them is an armor unit, so you are eligible for the exploitation, the breakthrough and the exploitation. But let's say that the result, instead of a defender retreats, was a defender eliminated. So that means it's only going to affect unit X. So once X is eliminated, you can see that if we exercise exploitation and move our armor unit into the vacated hex, that it really has no other place to go for its second movement point. So there really wouldn't be any point in exercising your exploitation movement there, unless you just wanted to advance your armor unit. But you have that option anyway after a defender eliminated. So at this point you could advance any of the units into the vacated hex, but there just wouldn't be any exploitation movement. So that's just one case where it could be limited. Obviously there's other cases where maybe you're on the edge of the map board, you've got a unit cornered and there's just no other place to go. So that's going to wrap up the rules portion of the video, and that is really all of the Strike Force 1 rules. There are a few more, there might be a few other rules that we'll talk about at the very end of the video having to do with the optional scenarios, but for our playthrough we're just going to use the basic scenario and the optional rules, and we basically covered all of those. So let's go ahead and set up the board and do our playthrough. Okay, so here we are set up, ready for our playthrough. Just because of the size of the board and the angle of the camera and stuff, I'm not going to try to include the random events table in the shot or the combat results table. You've seen those in previous videos, and you saw the random events table. We went over that in the previous part of this video. So I just wanted to zoom in on the board here for better visibility And then the only thing really missing out of the shot would be the game turn track. And then since you can't see that, I'm just going to throw up a little graphic between the game turns to just signify the separation there between the turns. So, all right, with the board set up, let's get started. The Soviet player will go first, and we'll begin the game. Game turn 1, the Soviet player will roll for random events, and again, because of the optional rule where we are using Soviet elite guards units, the Soviet player will get to roll for 2 random events and choose the one that's most advantageous. So the first random event we'll roll will be column 3 and row 4. So that's the first column, row 4. That's artillery support. Let's go ahead and roll again. We roll a 4, that's the second column, and a 4. So that's artillery support both times. So it looks like the Soviet player will have artillery support, not really much to choose there. He'll use this support marker, and he will be able to add +1 to any combats that he, or any attacks that he instigates in this game turn. So with that in mind, the Soviet player will go ahead and do the typical opening move here and try to get an advantageous attack on Unit X. And with our artillery support, he should stand a pretty good chance of getting a favorable result. 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Bring that in the bottom. And now what you would do with this is you would just place it on top of your hex that you're going to attack. The Soviet player is only going to have 1 attack this game turn, and that'll be on Unit X. And so we'll go ahead and resolve that now. And we'll roll, and by the way, I should have said, so he'll have 4 units plus the air support marker, so that's 5 attacking 1, so he'll be rolling on the +4 column. He rolls a 6, and on the +4 column, that's a defender retreat. So he'll retreat 1 hex. The exploitation and all of those rules only are in effect when armor is in play, and we don't have any armor units on the board yet, so it's just standard advance after combat, and we'll advance with Unit C there. Okay, and that will end the Soviet player's half of game turn 1. And I think, again, just like the other game, I think the US player's best option here is to go ahead and set up an advantageous line of defense here where he can minimize the amount of... Oh, you know what? I forgot. Before the US player does anything, he rolls for his random event. My bad. So roll the first roll is a 4. That's column 2 and row 2. So actually he gets a reinforcement unit right off the bat, so that's good news for the US player. So he'll bring in his West German reinforcement unit, and I think what we'll do with him is we will bring him right in here to shore up that unit, and we'll bring Z up like that. Okay, I think that'll end game turn 1 for the US player. I think we will take a defensive stand this turn, and now we will go on to game turn 2. Okay, game turn 2. The Soviet player will go ahead and roll for his 2 random events. Number 2 puts him in the first column for the first event. Row 6 is according to plan, so he doesn't like that one. So he's going to roll again the first column, and we'll call that a 1. So first column, row 1, ooh, he gets his armor unit. That's usually bad news for the US player. So the Soviet player will bring his armor unit in, and I think 1, 2, 3, 4 won't be able to come into play this turn, but he will be ready for the next turn. And let's see, for movement, I think the Soviet player will, let's see if we can set up a somewhat advantageous attack on Esselben here, since we're able to bring more firepower to bear on it. 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1. Okay, so that would be a 5-to-1 attack on Esselben. So again, we'd be rolling on the +4 column. This will be the only battle for the Soviets this turn. And we'll roll for that. And he gets a 5 on the +4 column. That's a defender retreats. And so Y is going to be forced to abandon Esselben. And the Soviet player will advance Unit C into Esselben, and that will end the Soviet player's half of game turn 2. So now it's the US player's turn. We'll roll for his random event. Rolls a 4, which is column 2, and then a 1. So column 2, row 1 is another reinforcement for the US player. This is his Pioneer unit. So I think what the Pioneer unit will do, he adds a defense strength of 2, and I think what we might want to do with him is go ahead and put him up here in Bergtheim, and that will, with the stacked with the other unit, will give that a defense strength of 3, which is pretty good. And then we will, again, the US player will not take the offense. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. I think the US player should take a little bit of an offensive stance here, because we don't want to allow the Soviet player to stack 2 units into Esselben if we don't have to. So what we're going to do is we're going to move these units into place there. We cleared the zones of control there, stack unit X on our reinforcement counter, and now we can bring 4 units of attack strength onto unit C there in Esselben. So we'll be rolling on the +3 column, and with that we get a 5 on the +3 column. We do get a defender retreats, so we're going to force the Soviet player back out of Esselben. And we will put unit Z in Esselben. Okay, so that was actually a good thing we decided to do that, because now we are still in control of all 3 towns at the end of game turn 2. Okay, so game turn 3 will see the battle raging around Esselben here. And the Soviet player is going to roll for his random events. First roll is a 4, that's column 2. Second roll is a 5, and that is Spetsnaz support. Okay, that's something he can use. I'll explain why in a minute. Then we're going to roll a 2, it's the first column, and a 4, which is artillery support. Now, artillery support and Spetsnaz support, what's the difference? Artillery support is going to add, if you recall from our look at the random events table, artillery support adds 1 to the attack strength, or the attack total for the Soviets. Spetsnaz support works a little differently, and Spetsnaz support is going to allow the Soviet player, when he rolls for combat, to roll the die twice and pick the lower of the 2 rolls. And this is not good news for the American. I'm going to show you why. And he's going to choose Spetsnaz support. And the reason why is because for his movement, the Soviet player is going to move his armor unit into play here in this battle, which is going to give him a pretty overwhelming attack total here of 5 infantry units plus the 2 armor units is 7. And 7-to-1 is a combat differential of 6, which is already past our maximum of 5. So you can see where the artillery support really wouldn't have helped him in this battle. And now an air support marker might have been able to come into play up here, because with +2 on the air support, he could have combined that with his infantry for a 3-on-3 attack to try to take Bergtheim, but that would have been a pretty low odds attack anyway. But the artillery support's only a +1, so even if he did add it up here, it would do him no good. So the artillery support in this particular situation does him no good. So he's going to take the Spetsnaz support. He's going to roll on the +5 for Ganheim. He's going to get to roll twice, and on the +5 column, 4 out of the 6. He stands no chance of having anything other than a defender retreat, worse than a defender retreat, and he has a 4 out of 6 chance of eliminating Unit Z. So all he has to roll in 2 rolls is a 4 or less. So he rolls a 5 on the first roll. Okay, so it's probably a good thing he has the Spetsnaz support. And on the second roll, he rolls a 1. So roll 1 is a defender eliminated, and Unit Z is off the board. And now, since we have the armor, we can exercise our breakthrough and exploitation. So, well, not breakthrough, because that's more of the retreating thing. But so here's the exploitation. So what we're going to do is we're going to advance the armor in there. We're going to move the armor down, and then we're going to put the infantry unit F into Esselben. Actually, yeah, we'll use unit F there. I think that's a good move right there. And that's going to end the Soviets' half of game turn 3. So now the US player will roll for his random events. He rolls a 5, which puts him in column 2. And he rolls a 2, which is a reinforcement marker. And since his reinforcement marker is already in play, that's a no effect. So no help from random events for the US player this turn. So I think since we want to try to keep the Soviet player out of Esselben as much as we can, we still have a +2 advantage here on that hex. So I think the US player is not going to move this turn, but he is going to go ahead and roll on the +3. I'm sorry, the +2 attack on unit F there in Esselben. He rolls a 4 on the +2 column. That's a defender retreats. So again, US player has taken Esselben, and that will end game turn 3. Now we're going into game turn 4, and if you recall from looking at the game turn track, game turn 4 is a night game turn, so that means for the next game turn units can attack or move, but not both. So both the US and Soviet player will have to decide what they're going to want to do there. It looks like for the Soviet player it's going to be an attack night. So alright, let's go on to game turn 4. Game turn 4, the night game turn. So the Soviet player is going to roll for his random events. Rolls a 1, which puts him in the first column. Another 1 gives him another armor unit. That's dangerous. And a 5. And another 5 gives him Spetsnaz support. I think he is going to take the armor unit in this case, and we're going to bring him in above, up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and get him ready for an attack on Bergtheim later. So what we will do is, because the armor unit is, this is game turn 4, you can move, or a unit can only move or attack, but it can't do both. So after you move your units, you're supposed to kind of flip them over there. Now the Soviet player has a unique situation down here where he's going to want to, I think what he wants in this next attack on Esselben is a defender retreat result. And the reason he wants that is because that will push back the US player to the point where he won't have a way to have an advantageous attack on Expaned. So and it might actually afford the Soviet player a chance to stack up there. So if we look at our table here, we'll see that our best chance for a defender retreat result is if we have a +3 or a +2, and since +2 has no effect in it, we'd rather have a +3. So what we're going to try to do is arrange this next combat so that we have a +3 advantage. This will all make sense in a minute. So we're going to go ahead and move these guys up north to participate in a battle on Bergtheim. 2, 3, 4. So he will be flipped. And 1, 2, 3, 4. And one more will be 1, 2. I'll leave him there. Okay. Now that leaves a 4-to-1 attack on Unit X for the remainder of the Soviet units. Unit A will not participate in anything this game turn. So we'll roll for combat results. We're on the +3 table. We get a 5, which is a defender retreats. So now X has to retreat, and it cannot retreat here because of the zone of control, so it's going to have to retreat this way. And if you recall, when armor's involved, you have a breakthrough, and now both of these units have to retreat one more hex. And now the armor can do its exploitation movement and move here, which will lock down those two units, and Unit F can come in and take control of Expaned. So we wanted that result. That's the result we wanted, and that gives the Soviets the best opportunity to hang on to Expaned, because we're in a night game turn and the US player cannot move and fight with his units. So right now he has no way to get back into and take control of Expaned before the Soviets' next movement turn, where he can bring Unit E in to stack on F and really take control of Expaned. So I think at this point the US player's best option is going to be to try to defend those last two towns for the last two game turns. So with that in mind, that is going to end the Soviet player's half of game turn 4. So then we just go ahead and flip the markers back over. Oops. Hard to work around the camera here. Alright, sorry about all that. Okay, so now we're ready for the US player to roll for his random events. And he really needs another reinforcement unit at this point. So he rolls a 2, which will put him in the first column, and a 5, which is command problems. So now the US player is allowed to take a Soviet unit and put it out of commission for the next game turn. And I think the obvious choice there is this armor unit, which is threatening to make defending Bergtheim very difficult. And so he's going to go ahead and place that unit upside down, which makes that unit ineligible to move or fight in the next game turn. So with that, the US player now has to figure out where he wants to go. I don't think he's going to do any combat this game turn. I think what will make sense for the US player at this point is to possibly move 1, 2, 3 1, 2, 3, and 1, and we'll put up a as much of a defense around Ganheim as we can. We're going to surrender Esselben. So now normally you'd flip these over because they're not supposed to fight during the next half, but we aren't going to have any combat, so we'll just leave them face up because basically game turn 4 is now over, and we will move on to game turn 5. Game turn 5. The Soviet player is rolling for random events. This first one is a 5, that's column 2. Row 2 is second echelon, so he can bring in a broken unit, but the Soviet player hasn't lost any units, so that doesn't do him any good. And the next one is a 2, that puts him in column 1. Row 1, and that's another armor unit. So both of his armor units are on the board. So really the Soviet player, even though he has 2 random events, neither one does him any good. So we'll just go on to his turn. And I think what the Soviet player wants to do is try to somehow get into Ganheim. So I think we will bring our armor unit up and around that zone of control, down and in on that. And he will bring this unit 1, 2, 3, 4 and surround unit V. We'll move unit E into Esselben, and we will bring unit D. Let's see. We're going to need unit D up here. Well, no, our best chance is definitely Ganheim down there. So 2. Where was he? 2, 3. He was here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So he really can't reach that attack yet. So he will stay there for now. Actually, since he can't do that yet, we're going to leave him up here. We're going to actually go ahead and try a +1. No, I don't think we will actually. Sorry about that. Alright, that's going to be it. We're going to do a +2 attack on Ganheim down here. And the Soviet player is going to roll. He gets a 3, which is a defender retreats. So since the US player can't retreat, he's eliminated. And the armor unit can move into Ganheim, and the Soviet player is now in control of his 2 objectives. But he is somewhat at risk there. Well, not really. He still can retreat to the bottom hex there. So that's going to end the Soviet player's turn. Now the US player is going to roll for random events. Rolls a 1, which puts him in column 1, and a 3. So he gets to rally a broken unit, or I'm sorry, yeah, rally a broken unit. So he's going to bring in his unit here and here. That was actually very helpful for the US player because it's now going to allow him to do a +2 attack on Ganheim here to try to retake it. I don't think the US player wants to do any movement at this point, so he's just going to do his roll for his +2 attack down here on Ganheim on the armor unit. So he rolls a 2, and for a +2 attack on the +2. That's a defender retreats. So his attack is successful, and he pushes into Ganheim for at the end of game turn 5. So at the end of game turn 5, the Soviet player is in a position where he is going to need to take Bergheim or Ganheim on the last game turn and then hold it. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, it's the last game turn. Now you see this unit up here that was out of action for game turn 5. The Soviet player gets to return him to normal. And now we'll go ahead and the Soviet player will roll for his random events. Could really use some support markers here. He rolls a 6 on the first one, which is column 2, and a 5, which is Spetsnaz support. So he's got Spetsnaz support and another column 2, and a 4, which is artillery support. So I think the Soviet player is going to want to use artillery support marker, and where he's going to want to use it is, let's see, probably his best shot is up here at Bergheim. We're going to go ahead and put it up there. It's about a 50-50 call, but we're going to go ahead and put it up there, and then we'll move our armor unit into play here and stack with unit A, and we're going to bring unit D around and into that woods hex, and we will set up an attack on Bergheim. And then we are already set up to try to retake Ganheim down here, but we are going to leave our unit E in there garrisoning Esselben, and that will end the movement phase for the Soviet player. Now we'll go to the attack phase. We'll go with top to bottom. So we're going to start with the attack up here on Bergheim, and he's got 1, 2, 3, 4 plus the extra point for the armor. He's got 5, and then his support marker for artillery is +1, so that's a total of 6. And on the defending side, we've got a defense strength of 2 on the Pioneer unit and +1 regular infantry there, so that's 3. So that's the +3. So we'll be rolling on the +3 table for this attack. And he rolls a 2, which is an exchange. So with the exchange, I think the US player will eliminate his infantry unit, and the remaining unit has to retreat. Now, because of the armor, again, the retreat has to be 2 hexes because of the breakthrough and exploitation. And the armor unit can now come up here and block out the Pioneer unit, and we will move unit A into place, and the Soviet player for his exchange will send unit C to the showers, and that will leave that attack looking like that, which looks good for the Soviet player so far. And now he has still another shot down here to take Ganheim, and he's got a 3-to-1 attack, so he'll be rolling on the +2 column there, and he will roll a 2 on the +2 column, which is defender retreats, so he gets the result he wanted there. And again, exploitation, so he can roll up there and put F into Esselben, and now he has effectively eliminated unit Z from being able to participate in an attack to try to retake Esselben. So that was another pretty advantageous result for the Soviet player. So now the US player, it's basically going to be all down to his best chance of retaking either Bergheim or Ganheim. And first he'll roll for his random events. He gets a 4, which puts him in the second column. and another 4. So 4 in row 4 is air support, so that will come in handy. So I think he will take the air support marker and put it on unit F down here, and I don't think he has any way to bring unit Z into the battle up here. Although what he could do with unit Z is 1, 2, 3. He could have a last-ditch effort there to try to do a +0 combat differential attack as a last-ditch way to try to retake Bergheim up there. So that at least gives him 2 shots. So we've got 2 battles. We'll go ahead and take the lowest odds one first. That's rolling on the 0 column of the combat results table. And he rolls a 6, which is attacker eliminated, so that's not going to do a whole lot of good. So he lost that one. And now it's pretty much down to, well, that's it really. That means the Soviet players won the game, because he's now garrisoning Bergheim and Eisleben. So we'll go ahead and just roll it out just to see what would have happened. And we have a 5, which if we were rolling, we had 1, 2, and 3, 4. We had a 4 plus 3. That would have been a defender retreat. We would have got our result there. But we hold 1 city, the Soviet player holds 2 cities, so the Soviet player is the victor in this game. And I have found that with this basic scenario, this is the first one where I see the Soviets winning most of the time, because even with the fact that the U.S. player has the last roll, the Soviet player with his 2 shots at random events, he's usually picking up armor units, finally has enough, can usually bring enough firepower to bear to overcome that last turn advantage that the U.S. player has had up until now. So anyway, that's the way the advanced expansion kit plays, and I think the next thing we'll do is I'll just quickly show you some of the 2 additional scenarios that came with the game. They're different than the basic scenario that we just played. I'll just give you a look at those, and then we'll do some final wrap-up comments, and that'll be it for Strike Force 1. Here you see this is the last part of the instructions, and what they're giving you here is 2 additional scenarios with different setups. One's called the meeting engagement scenario, and says in this scenario both players begin with few units on the map. As they make initial contact and discover each other, most units enter play as reinforcements. And so that's going to be just like a completely different kind of approach to the game. Should have a totally different kind of feel to it. And then the other scenario is called the NATO Counterattack, and basically this scenario here is designed to be kind of the reverse of the basic scenario, where it's going to be the Russian player that's defending the towns, and the NATO player will have more units, and it'll give the Soviet player a chance to kind of play a defensive strategy. So we'll do just a quick, I'll just set up both scenarios and let you see what they look like on the map. Okay, here's what the scenario 11.2, the meeting engagement scenario, looks like. And as you can see, we only start off with 3 units on the map, 2 for the Soviet, 1 for the US player. And if you look up here, you can see that most of the units will enter the board as reinforcements, and you can get a kind of a view there of the reinforcement schedule. So on game turns 1 through 3, you'll see that all those other units will enter the game. So that's that scenario. So then we'll take a look at the next one, which is NATO counterattack scenario. So the NATO counterattack scenario is 11.3, and that one depicts the aftermath of the Soviet conquest of this area. So this is kind of like a sequel to the end of the basic scenario where the Soviets would have been successful in taking 2 towns. And as you can see, the bulk of the US forces are going to come in here as reinforcements right at the beginning of the game. And the Soviet player, if we zoom back out, will be beginning the game occupying Esselben and Ganheim, and then also the woods hex outside Bergheim. So that game will be seeing the Soviet player trying to defend against a US player that has more units. And one more thing on the scenarios is that the victory conditions are slightly different than the standard scenario, and I'll show you those real quick. The victory conditions are based on victory points, and you can see that you get 2 victory points for having a unit occupying the town hex at 0405, which is Esselben, and then 1 victory point each for occupying the wood hex at 0506 or 0603, and then you get a victory point for each enemy infantry unit that you eliminate, and 2 victory points for each enemy armored or pioneer unit that you eliminate. So if you look at the map, you'll see that when we were looking at the map and the component overview, you'll see that several of the hexes have these broad border outlines, and that's basically to identify those as the victory condition hexes for these additional scenarios. They don't really come into play for the basic scenario that we did the playthrough for, but in these additional scenarios, since those are your objective hexes, they put a broader, bold outline around them to identify them. So that's 2 more possibilities to expand the playability of the game. And I think now we'll just go ahead and make some closing remarks, and then we'll move on to our next game. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for our look at Strike Force 1 and the Strike Force 1 expansion kit. I'm going to say it again, I know I've said it before, I think this is an excellent place to start if you're teaching yourself to play games on your own. If you're fortunate enough to have somebody who's an experienced gamer to teach you, then you could definitely probably start with something more complex with a little more meat. But I don't have that option, so I think this was just the right place to start for me. And I think there was kind of a lot of concepts that these games introduced in various phases. I mean, we started out with the basic components. We have counters, map, combat results tables, random events charts. We learned about basic movement in combat, zones of control, stacking, reinforcements, off-board air and artillery support, different types of units. We had infantry, armor, engineering units. We had special armor rules for infiltration and breakthrough and exploitation. They introduced the concepts of victory conditions and objective hexes. We had multiple scenario options there at the end of the expansion kit. And then through the battle lesson portion that Victory Games includes in their instructions, they even kind of try to teach you some basic maneuver and defense strategies. So, and they do all this in a game that has a very low counter density, so you're not overwhelmed with 20 or 30 or 50 counters on the board and trying to see through the see the forest through the trees there. Because it's such a low counter density, it's very easy to grasp the concepts and see how they're affecting this battle or that battle, because you don't have 5 or 6 battles to look at all at once. You have 1 or 2 to concentrate on. So again, that's going to wrap up the first game in my attempt to teach myself these games. So I think the next video or two will be, you know, something different, maybe, you know, something light while I figure out which game I want to play next, and then when I decide that, we'll be back with an introduction of that game. And until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.